Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I am, of course, Sean M. Thompson.
And I'm Brian O'Connell.
And on this episode, we will be discussing the 2016 film, The Love Witch. I was about to say Love Witch. I mean, close enough. Written, directed, edited, costumed, set designed by Anna Biller, and starring Samantha Robinson and others.
Yes, Anna Biller did, she's a true auteur. She's responsible for almost everything you see in the frame.
I mean, yeah, no matter what you feel about this film, like, the fact that someone was able to be competent at the writing, directing, editing, costume design, and set design all on one film is astounding.
She also wrote some of the songs, and
she worked on some of the music. I forgot to mention that.
Did the paintings in Elaine's house in her apartment. So she's been, her hands are everywhere in this movie, and that is certainly one of its most impressive qualities.
That is one of the most impressive qualities. So I guess right off the bat, like, I think you liked this film more than I did.
I did, I think. We talked about it a little before.
Yeah, and we'll get into the specifics. I'm also coming at this from a different angle. Like, this is my second time watching the film.
Yeah. And I imagine I don't want to give the impression that I didn't have issues with this, and I probably would feel somewhat differently about it on a second viewing.
Right, and I also want to specify, when I say that you liked the film more than I did, I'm not saying I hated this film. I mean, I've watched it twice.
Yeah.
And, obviously I get to watch some lady nude for half the movie, so.
Yeah.
Which is probably very telling, I mean, considering the thematic stuff. But yeah, I guess we should get into it.
It is, okay, so Anna Biller, who has spoken extensively and very thoughtfully about her intent for the film, says she doesn't like it when it's called a pastiche. So I'm not calling it a pastiche, but it is drawing very heavily on the aesthetics and kind of narrative and acting mode of films of the 60s especially, but also the melodramas.
Early 70s?
Yeah, early 70s. But there's also some of the women's pictures and melodramas of the 50s, I would say, in certain scenes. I've mentioned Douglas Sirk before, but, when they go to this cottage in the woods, with the blue windows, it struck me as very Sirk. And there's some, you talked, and this I also, I agree with, although I haven't seen many of them. But you said it evoked Hammer horror to you quite a bit.
Oh yeah, no, if you've seen, especially from the 60s and 70s, the Hammer films, just in terms of like the saturation and the color palette is very similar.
Yeah.
And also the acting style, you do get the sense that the directing went out of it, or Anna Biller went out of her way to be like, can you slow that line down? Like, can you kind of say it in a certain way? Because it does mirror some of the acting in the horror, or in the Hammer horror films from the 60s and 70s. Also, it made me think of the Dunwich Horror, which is a film from, I want to say, the 70s.
I think it is. Is that the one from, what is it? American International with like...
Yeah, AIP. I think it's an AIP picture.
Yeah. I know what you're talking... I haven't seen it. But certainly drawing on those traditions and the acting...
Yeah, but I don't know that I'd say it's pastiche, because I don't know, the term pastiche is very loaded. There's a reason artists don't like it. It's because it generally means like ripping something off, but not really bringing anything.
Yeah, and she says, Anna Biller, and I believe her, and I understand what she's talking about when she says this, but she has always argued that the film's presentation and everything is actually very personal to her and comes from her own, sense of the story and the characters, that she wasn't explicitly looking to like just take elements from films of the past and pastiche them together.
No,
So
because it's not a period piece.
no,
In a somewhat bizarre way, it's like the character of the Love Witch kind of operates outside of time.
yeah, it
Because it's like
is.
all of her dress and her automobile and her decoration is very 60s and 70s, but then everyone else around her is now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the acting is still very classical and the clothing can be anachronistic, but like, most of the other cars, the storefronts, like it's today. It's just in some
Yeah, to the point
weirdly
where it's actually pretty funny. In the first, 10 minutes, there's a lot of monologue in this film.
yes.
And she's driving her, I think it's a Mustang,
Yeah, it
along the
looks
California coast and kind of just reflecting on her love life. And then she gets pulled over, and you see the cop car is like a modern cop car. And that's your
yeah.
first, like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and when her friend pulls up, her car is also
Yeah, it's like
like
a BMW.
it's really I think a phone shows up at one point and it's like it's not so much it isn't set in the past. It's set in a very strange aestheticized version of the present. And
Yeah,
that
actually, in that regard, it sort of reminded me of It Follows.
oh yeah, I
It
could see
Follows
that.
sort of had this like 80s aesthetic going, despite the fact that it's very clearly set in the now.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that a
And
lot.
also thematically, they have there's some similarities in terms of just sexuality and how that brings about horror.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. In this film, I think the very I would say so the thing that I mean, and I also I didn't just look at it from the point of view of horror films, but also of melodramas and everything.
That's right. That
Oh,
is sort of reductionist to just say, to compare it to the horror stuff, because it's clearly drawing on, you know,
several different
other styles. Yeah.
yeah, but these are modes of cinema that have traditionally, with the exception of horror to a degree, they're linked with femininity or were targeted at women.
Yeah.
And that I think reflects in a very clever way if you think about it the psychology of our titular love witch played by Samantha Robinson, who we did say the acting is kind of stilted and a little wooden,
But
but
it's clearly supposed to be that way.
yeah, but I think she actually sells it. She's the best performance in the film by far,
Oh,
I think.
easily.
And I hope, I mean, I know she was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but I hope she gets cast in many other roles because I think it's a very promising performance. She conveys quite a bit just through the facial expressions and the tone of voice, which that kind of reminded me of Ingrid Goes West in a way, because it's this character who is constantly putting on a performance
Oh,
for
yeah. No, I see what you mean then. Yeah.
yeah. In Ingrid Goes West, she's putting on this performance for Taylor that's linked to, social media. But in this movie, Elaine, the character, is putting on an extremely traditional conservative vision of like Hollywood femininity to try and appeal to the men around her. And only in her monologues and in occasional like flickers of expression do you actually get a sense of what she's really feeling about this whole thing beneath that hiding. And I thought Samantha Robinson did very well in conveying that those aspects of her
She
character's
did. No, she did
personality.
a good job at it. I mean, also just a very attractive woman, so it
Yes, she's
worked
beautiful. She's
on
beautiful.
that end.
Yeah. Well, she
Yeah, I
does.
will say when I think of, the character of the Love Witch, I really can't picture. It's like even if it was a different actress, it would be similar
It's her.
mannerisms and a
Yeah.
similar look. Like that kind of dark hair and like
Yeah.
light, like very very white skin.
Yeah. She.
Although that is also clearly influenced by the the climate. I'm not saying she couldn't be black. That just would have
Yeah.
been a different film.
Yeah, no. Well, but I think Samantha Robinson, and just the character in general, does a very good job of feeling like a movie star, Like
Yeah,
she
she feels very old Hollywood.
yeah, which is the point. It's part of the fantasy that this character is trying to sell. But before we get into some of the more thematic stuff, I guess we should talk about some of the less effective parts of this film, I guess, and which I think we share some ground on. I think I may
Yeah,
not have been.
yeah. I think personally, I think this film could have lost like 15 or 20 minutes.
Yes,
I know that the
it's
whole point was to be this slower style of pacing and editing and all that, but even then, there was some stuff that just felt sort of extraneous.
yeah. For me, I thought, I'll be very frank, especially in the first half, I thought the pacing of this movie was kind of plodding along a little bit. It wasn't. I mean, it's always interesting to look at what's on screen, but in terms of like a narrative thrust, I wasn't like gripped, especially in the first half. And then some of the scenes, especially the ritualistic scenes with the coven of witches, were just like, it felt a little like outside of the actual core narrative, and it just didn't entirely work for me in that sense. Although it is, it's always beautiful to look at. There's always, I mean, something fascinating going
Yeah,
on
I
with
think
color and
there
lighting.
was there was a good there was a nice quality when she was just flashing back to it because it made it a little bit more mysterious.
Yeah, and sinister.
Yeah, and then when it became much more overt and she's like hanging out at a burlesque club like with the head of the
Yeah.
coven, it became a little like, yeah, we get it, they're witches.
For me, the one where they were outdoors in the naked circle and the guy was wearing horns and he was talking about the goddess, and this felt a little like, I mean, because even in the burlesque scene, they're talking about things that are kind of relevant to
That's
the
true, yeah.
the themes, but in that scene I was just so not it just wasn't meshing with the main narrative. So I do think it could have lost
Yeah,
I
because I
mean,
think the strength of the film is when it is so internal. I keep calling her the Love Witch. I forget what her name is.
Elaine.
Elaine. It is so internal in Elaine's head, and like
Yeah.
that is so much of the film is just hearing her monologue and then seeing the juxtaposition or the dichotomy between what she's thinking and then like what she's doing. That when
Yeah.
you pull back and it's just like you
Stuff
know
happening.
like yeah, when it's like 20 minutes of like rituals, it's like, yeah, she's a witch and we've got the flashback already, so
I think that accounts for some of the disconnect I also felt in the police office scenes a bit,
yeah,
because
because they seem very, because everything else is very stylized, and whether it's set in the 60s and 70s or not, it has that flair. But then when
yeah.
it's just a police station now, it's like, I get why we need to have somebody investigating her, but it didn't need to be.
There's so many
Yeah,
scenes of them investigating her, and the scene where they visit the occult expert. It's just it just didn't have much to do to me with the main thrust of the story. I just, yeah, I mean, I felt like some of that is certainly important, but a lot of it just went
I
on
mean,
a
I would
bit.
argue the ritual scenes are important.
Yeah,
Although the thing is, if it's, see, that's the thing. If it's supposed to be like a horror Hammer horror kind of nod. It makes sense because a lot of those films will have sort of elongated, like they're still doing a ritual
Yeah.
scenes.
Yeah.
But since it seems like she wasn't trying for that necessarily,
Yeah.
you didn't need to have them, or at least need to have them that long.
Yeah. And far be it from me to complain about a movie for having too many ritual scenes. Like, I love a good ritual scene, but it just felt what's most interesting in this story to me is Elaine's journey, which they didn't. I mean, they stray from it occasionally across the narrative, and I also think they don't. She doesn't quite mine it for all of the dramatic potential it has. Like, it feels a little subdued at points, in
Yeah, there were moments where I understand not wanting to go that hard on it, but
yeah,
like, like even, during the ritual scene, you get the sense that the head of the coven, the man,
yeah,
he's a predator. He's sort of a
yes,
sexual predator, and he
yes,
like goes over and grabs her boob, and she's not into it.
yeah,
And like I felt like that was important. Like
oh
that was
yeah,
an important kind of like showing even with this man who's saying how beautiful and strong women are and how they're the source of everything. You
yeah.
sort of you get the sense he doesn't really believe it because he's going over and just like grabbing boobs like without
Yeah,
asking.
and whenever he sees any of the witches, he kisses them like on every part of their body in like a
And I'm
ritualized.
sure that's accurate too, like, like in cults and like in
Oh yeah,
actual witch covens that exist. I'm sure there's a lot of that if there is a male. I mean, I would argue there's probably not that many with male leaders, but
yeah. Well, I mean, it evokes. I don't pretend to know a lot about this, but
oh, I have no idea.
it
Like, I'm just talking out
evokes.
of my ass.
Yeah, some of the like reservations I have, especially when I see like Levian Satanism, like
Shaham Farash. Yes, I've read the Satanic Bible.
oh really? Oh wow.
Yeah, it's
Um,
very, and I'll keep this a very short aside. I know I tend to ramble on these.
well, it's interesting.
Levian Satanism, all you need to know is that man used to be a carnival barker, and that's it. Because it's like the whole style is just like to the north winds, like Shahem for it's just very theatrical, and it's like it's fine in
Yeah,
that regard, but like people that take it seriously, I'm like, really?
yeah. I don't know. And but then you see like footage in some of the. I watched that Hail Satan question mark documentary on Hulu, which is great, and I
Is it
recommend
good?
it.
I've thought about it.
It's about the other Satanists, the Satanic Temple,
Oh
which
yeah, no, we went and there's one in Salem. We went and we saw the statue, and I got to sit on Baphomet's lap.
I want to visit that so
I
bad. I
mean, they
can't
keep it in a
now.
shed. It's pretty funny because you go into the main building and you're expecting it to be in there, and then they're like, "Oh, do you want to see Baphomet? Yeah, it's in a shed because it's like 1,000. It's like so heavy it would just break through the floor."
Oh wow. Okay. Well, I would have loved to. Well, that's the movie's about those guys.
Okay, all right. No, they're cool. I like them. They sort of use their platform as like we're gonna claim religious like rights and like fight for social justice under that
I think
guise.
they almost like strike me as more of like a rogue political prankster group than
Yeah, no, I would say that's fair.
yeah, but getting so in that documentary they have footage of Levian Satanism as like a contextual thing, and it is like Anton LaVey surrounded by a lot of naked women and they're doing rituals, and it felt like kind of like I could see this being exploited and probably is exploited for predatory purposes. And this film gets into that and also
Yeah,
throws a couple of digs at it, which I found amusing. They talk about like, how we all used to have Baphomet posters and like, as like I thought some of that stuff was funny as a person with very admittedly limited knowledge of contemporary occult doings. But yeah, it is to get to the point. The movie is about it's a feminist film that is working through feminist film theory.
Yeah.
I found some of it somewhat opaque upon watching it, but I think the reading that I've come to of it, judging just by interviews with Anna Biller and certain reviews and takes and things, is that it's about this woman who, after having been kind of used and abused by men in her past, has basically decided to internalize like the worst narratives our culture has about like what a good relationship is.
Yeah, no, that's accurate, I think. I
And
intentionally kind of go out of my way not to read reviews because I don't
yeah,
want to be. But it's good that
influenced.
one of us does, so one of us
Well,
is at
it
least
wasn't
informed.
really. I didn't look so much at reviews, but mostly at interviews because I
Oh,
did.
yeah, no, yeah, that's fair. I will look at interviews with the directors and things.
I did. I was a little unsure during the film of what exactly this story was trying to communicate, but I
I mean, one
think
thing I really like about this film is that over and over, and she might not even know what she wants, but over and over, Elaine, the love witch, talks about how she just desperately wants love. I want love. All I want is love. And
yeah,
then she'll, basically poison these men with hallucinogens and do love spells, and then they will fall desperately in love with her. And it's like the second she gets that, she's like, oh, gross, and just moves
yeah,
on. So it's
yeah,
like you don't really want love. You're sort of just like an emotional vampire.
yeah.
You want it for
It's
the short term, but like you don't really, because it's like when they actually fall head over heels for her, she just kind of like is like, okay, sure.
Yeah, well, there is that scene that struck me as kind of. This was one of the spookier, I found it a little unsettling scenes in the movie, but she poisons basically. eh, She isn't intending to poison him, but she drugs that guy, the professor, and he falls ill, and he's screaming for her from his bedroom, like, Elaine, Elaine. And she's just smoking very icily on the couch, and she just says, "What a pussy." And it's almost like when she does this to these men and they become so emotional and deeply in love with her that it feminizes them to her. Like they become too
Yeah, it's almost
feminine.
like the role reversal where instead of the man being the one that like has sex with the
Yeah.
woman, then he's off smoking and she's like, "Hey, can you come here?" And he's like, "Whatever, bitch." Like it's
Yeah.
they just flip it.
Yeah, they flip. Yeah, and that's it. Isn't what she's looking for. What she's looking for is basically a fairy tale, and that's why I think maybe not my favorite, but one of my favorite scenes in the film is she thinks she's fallen in love with this police officer, and they walk into like this weird Renaissance fair type situation.
And I
And
can't prove this because I didn't bother to check, but one of the jesters that's dancing on the stage,
yeah,
I've seen a picture of Anna Biller, and I'm like, is that Anna Biller?
yeah, I kept looking for her in the movie because she actually acted in her previous feature film Viva and like a lot of her shorts and things. So
So I would not be shocked if that's her in the yellow makeup doing the dance.
yeah, it's
But
I
I
have
don't
to
want to
check
say it
that.
is because it might not be.
Yeah, but in this scene they basically do this mock wedding in these like goofy outfits with like a crown and dresses and white shirts, and to me it struck me as like a kind of mocking parody of like the heterosexual ideal that our culture promotes, that it's like this masculine man and he's a king and this beautiful woman and she's a princess and they're bound together in matrimony, and that's what she's been chasing. Like that's the fantasy she wants to live,
Right.
but it's not. It's a lie. It's just it's ridiculous.
No, the cake is a lie. It is.
Yeah, it is not. It's not. It's the narrative our culture sells to, in to paraphrase Anna Biller a little bit, women are told the cultural norm for women is to
Is you're
be,
supposed to want that. You're supposed to want to basically be an indentured servant. I mean, back in
yeah,
the day, marriage was literally like
it was like
it was
that.
like if you give me your property, which is a girl, I will give you 5 cows or something. Like it was
Yeah,
a lot more like what I feel like marriage actually is. And then we've
transactional.
somehow sugarcoated it so that the marriage industry and so like,
Yeah.
magazines and dress companies and all this other stuff can make a living.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like, I mean, obviously,
I mean, it's so ingrained in the culture that like I don't know that. Oh, and I hesitate to say things,
go ahead.
feminist things, because it's like, what the hell do I really know? But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like a lot of women, they're just sort of, it's drilled into them. You should have a wedding, and whether they believe that they should or not, it's something they do because they have to
It's,
pretend like it's something they really wanted to do, and it makes them very happy. And
yeah.
maybe it does make them very happy. They do get to have a big party, but it's like
It's not, I mean, because the thing is,
you're
obviously,
literally it's like it's literally just so the government can combine you.
yeah, it's not a, I mean, it's not like a, it's not, it isn't the most important event. I mean, for some people it is, and that's fine. But it is, I mean, the thing is, like, Elaine takes it to a very literal extreme, and
Right.
it was more extreme in the past. But it is, like, still kind of shocking how, like, it's
Well,
subtler,
it's
but
like I mean just the language of it, like the father gives away the
yeah,
bride, right?
it
It's like she
is.
isn't deciding to go get married. It's like she has to be given
She's been
away by her
given.
family.
It's, I mean, and those ideas are still, like, really deep in our culture,
They're very potent, yeah.
even if they are not as deep as they were in not as explicit as they were in the 50s, or as symbolic as what Elaine does in this movie, which is to take that to the extreme where she literally is seeking to be a pleasure object for men. Like, she wants to objectify herself for other men. And it's just, it is really like a sinister thing. I mean, to be teaching people that the ideal, the fantasy,
Oh, since the as from childhood age, it's like every Disney
yeah,
movie ends with a wedding. It's all
yeah,
about the princess looking for her prince.
it's just, it's not, it's a very, and I think my favorite, the moment where I kind of saw what the film was doing the most, and the smartest and most incisive moment in the film for me is the very ending, which, you know, spoilers, whatever, but the police officer doesn't love her, and he refuses her potion that would have, like, done him off like all of the other men. And this stone faced resistance to just the lie she's been selling to people horrifies her, and she kills him. And intercut with her, like, clasping the bloody knife to her chest and the man's dead face is back to the wedding, and it's a fantasy version where he rides her off into the sunset on a horse, and they love each other forever. And I love that juxtaposition between the mythological ideal of, like, a heterosexual marriage and just the realities of life, which is that, one, that ideal doesn't exist, and when people try to create it, it more often than not becomes something perverse and dehumanizing for both the
Yeah,
women
yeah, no,
and
I
the
would agree
men.
with that.
I mean, it winds up hurting all of the men around her as well. Nobody actually wants that, but
Yeah,
people are
one thing
taught.
I came to on the second watch
Yeah,
that I don't know that I necessarily got on the first watch is it could very much be seen as a film about the cycle of abuse
yeah,
because it's
yeah.
clearly she's been wronged in the past, so she internalizes that, but then she takes it out on people that or more or less innocence. I mean, like,
Yeah.
like, okay, so the professor wants to have sex with this woman. Like,
Yeah.
you can think what you want about that, but it's like she poisons him, and he's desperately like, please help me. I'm terrified. You poisoned. You gave me drugs without telling me. And
Yeah.
she's like, geez, what a pussy. It's,
Yeah.
it's like internalized misogyny.
Yeah, it is.
And it's sort of like it's like trying to get back at people that are no longer even in your life by destroying new people's lives and perpetuating this cycle.
yeah. And I think most pointedly, she betrays her female friend who I forget the character's name. I think it's Barbara or something.
I think it's I think Barbara was the head of the coven.
What's
I can't remember now, yeah.
Oh, is it it's Trish.
Yes, yep.
Trish Elaine seduces, casts a spell on Richard, Trish's husband Richard, who ultimately loses his mind and kills himself. And that's such a betrayal of other women, you know? It's like she and there's this, I thought it was kind of a haunting scene where Trish almost gives in and dons the wig and makeup of Elaine's wig and makeup in an attempt to like, maybe I should be this like fantastical figure that, embodies what culture says men want in women. But she resists and she gives up when she sees the picture of Richard that Elaine has retained, because she knows that not only is what Elaine is selling a lie, but it's a dangerous and harmful lie that tears people apart.
And
And
I
I
think it is. I'm glad that that scene is in there because it does. I think another strength of the film is the juxtaposition between what is said and the actions.
yeah. Yeah.
She talks about how there's a lot of like, I love my sisters and women should be together and like women are beautiful and all of this
Yeah.
stuff, right? But then
Yeah.
it's like the first chance she gets, this one of the
Yeah.
only female friends she has, she seduces her husband
Husband.
and then kind of leaves him to die because she's poisoned him with this weird drug.
Yeah. And I think very telling is also that early conversation between Trish and Elaine, where Elaine is like, you have to give men their fantasy. You have to give them everything they want and total freedom in what they can do or be. And Trish is like, that's not life. That isn't, I mean, it's about being equal and respecting each other's freedom and finding like a plateau between that. And I find Trish is the true feminist in that scene, I think, because
No, I think so.
she hasn't been poisoned by this awful narrative about the ideal relationship that Elaine has so thoroughly internalized. And obviously, this is another good scene, I think. Elaine has internalized that because men have forced it upon her in the past. Like, there's the scene where she, I believe, applies flying ointment, and she hears the voices of her dead husband and father talking about like, you need to clean up around the house more and you're looking overweight and you need to take care of yourself and you need to like, it's all of these like dehumanizing things that she's been told by men in the past that
Yeah, a
have
lot of the
driven
film I
her.
think could be seen as internalized misogyny.
Yeah, I think that's the core of it. Is that she's as a result of the harm that has been done to her under, this, I guess, patriarchal or misogynistic system. She's decided, like, fuck it, let me be the ideal woman, let me be the old Hollywood star, let me be, the living fantasy. But it turns out that you can't, that fantasy that our culture tells women to be doesn't exist. It's an impossible
No, it doesn't
standard.
really exist because when you try to like give yourself so freely to people, and this isn't a comment about like being willing to have sex with people, like
Yeah,
who
no, no, no.
cares, but
Yeah.
when you're like bending over backwards to be what somebody wants, but that's not who you are,
Yeah.
it's like disingenuous and it's not. Yeah, no, that old Hollywood, it doesn't exist because it was in films, you know? Like the
Yeah.
reality of the woman in the 50s is like, you know, like you're a
Horrifying.
servant, like you're stuck in
Yeah.
the house and like you're going to do this when I say.
Yeah. Well,
And it was, yeah.
that's why I think the design of the film is so important narratively, is that she envisions herself as the star of her own melodrama, even up to like the schmaltzy music that she plays, that is played when she first realizes that the policeman is the one, and she's like, she's envisioning herself as the star of this glamorous world, but the reality is that when people do that in real life, it's not just disingenuous, it's also creepy and overbearing and, you know, harmful to oneself and other people.
It
So
really is. I really also like that, you know, during the mock wedding,
mm-hmm.
we get her internal monologue where she's like, I'm so happy he's the one, that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. And he thinks, I don't love this woman. I don't know that I'm capable of love because when you're soft like that, you get taken out as a police officer. But like, he
Yeah.
clearly never loves her, but like, for some reason, then that is what she's drawn to that. So that could also be seen as sort of internalized misogyny where it's like,
She's
she
drawn to
falls in love with
this.
the man that is like least emotionally available.
Yeah, it's almost like this valorization of this, of what we might call, toxic masculinity in its extreme form. I would say this man is more like stoic and kind of harsh and unemotional, but he isn't as awful as other men are in the
No,
film.
no, but I mean, like, it's very telling that,
Yeah,
and I do like this about the film, that, like, when
yeah,
these men do, like, really fall in love with her and are, like, opening their hearts up and being very emotional, which is what
yeah,
she claims she wants.
yeah. It
When that
isn't.
happens, she gets very turned off.
Yeah, she's almost like it's almost like this masochistic quest to
Yeah.
be the woman who doesn't exist and find the man who doesn't
Who doesn't
exist.
exist,
She
yeah.
prefers the dream to the reality, which is that, men are not interested in what she's selling, or she isn't ready for the emotional involvement, or they hurt her like the cult leader or the town when they knock her down and say burn the witch, and it looks like an attempted rape is occurring. I think it's kind of tragic in that way. Also, the wedding scene had the line that made me laugh the most in the film, which is he says, you just wind up drowning in estrogen, and I just like just wait. I think there is a good amount of very dry humor outside of just the stilted acting or the
No, it is
anachronism.
funny. There are parts that, like when she's making, when the first man she seduces dies and she's making a little jar to put with his body so she can be
Yeah,
with him. It's like she's literally taking a used tampon and putting it in piss, and then
yeah.
she's like, men think that tampons are so gross, and it's like you're dipping your old
Blood.
tampon into
Yeah.
pee. It's
It
just really
is like,
funny. I
yeah,
don't
and
know.
she's yeah, it's very it's a funny. I think it has those
I think it's
comedic
more fun. I
elements.
don't. It's not like legitimately horrifying. There are some
No.
parts where, I mean, I was legitimately a little bit disturbed with that guy who was like hallucinating and like clearly just like devastated, and she just smokes
Yeah.
in the other room. Like, what a
That
puss.
was that was the most overtly unsettling moment to me of the film. And I find the scene where she's like kind of ecstatically smiling over this bloody knife at the end a little spooky, but it isn't really.
Yeah, I
It's
think
more.
primarily its intent is to be funny.
It's there's funny, and I would say it's like conceptually it's disturbing, but it isn't moment to moment like horrifying or
No,
anything.
no, it's not like. I mean, like, I feel like the actual horrific counterpoint to this would be a film like Midsummer,
Yeah, that's
where it's like
more.
that legitimately, like,
Yeah,
goes to places, but, like, it plays around with the relationship dynamic.
yeah. But this, also as a side note, she said that her next movie, Anna Biller's next movie, will be an overt horror movie based
Okay, so
on
yeah, I'm
the.
excited. I'm excited to see if she keeps up with the kind of very signature at this point, because I haven't seen her other film, but it looked very similar in terms of the palette and like the
She
design.
likes the. I read a list of her influences, and I share a lot of her love for a lot of these directors. So there's Cirque and Fassbinder and Jacques Demy, and all of these like. I would say I honestly, I mean, I talk about this too much as is, but I would say that the genre that the Love Witch sits most comfortably in is like it's like a Technicolor melodrama. It's about this, you know, um, it's a subversion of this idealized romantic quest, and it draws on those traditions of the women's picture and the melodrama in order to criticize them or take them apart. So I would say it's more that than a horror film,
Yeah,
in terms of just like being the emotional or stylistic effects.
no,
But
that's true.
I do look
Um,
forward to seeing
yeah,
what
I
she
look forward
does.
to seeing, and I do have to mention, I would feel disingenuous without mentioning this at all.
Mm-hmm.
There were parts where, when I was watching The Love Witch, where, as a relatively straight man, I found myself being like, hey, which is fair, because, like, the
Yeah.
whole thing is like, straight men are terrible.
Well, I don't know if it's. I mean,
I mean, maybe not, but the thing is, what I was going to
it's
say, what brought it
certainly.
back for me was, it's like, if
Yeah.
you go just off of the speech, yes, but if you go off the actions, it's like, well, you're killing people, though, so you're not
Yeah.
much better.
Yeah. It is. It is. Um, I wouldn't say it has male gaze, but obviously there's a lot of sexuality that the character brings to the film, which I find it kind of amusing that when she's doing these like she's stripping for these men and it's like this erotic dance that she's doing, it's scored with the most unsettling music in the
Yeah.
film. I found that no, but that struck me as a kind of like interesting take on it, that these like that these scenes are the most overtly like fantastical, the scenes where she's trying to sell this sexual fantasy, but it's undercut by this like uncanny music. I found like so to get back to some of the criticisms, I found all of this like extremely conceptually interesting and in my lane. I think where the film falters a little is just the viewing experience can feel a little like I don't know if dry is the right word, but I mean there were moments where I felt kind of uninvested and a little.
I mean, yeah, especially, I remember watching this the first time through and having my moments where I was like, this is a little slower, but, ultimately it kept me engaged.
Yeah.
I will say on the second watch, attempting to go through, like, knowing what would happen,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's true with any film, but
Mm-hmm.
it is such a stylistic piece and it is so much about the design and the costuming and this and that. I
Yeah.
felt like narratively it might be a little thin at times.
I thought the film just, and it's just really it comes down to a script narrative level more than anything else, because I really actually identify with the tradition she's drawing on, and I do love the style, and the ideas are fascinating to me. I find the take on gender dynamics very interesting in this film. But just in terms of like did the story keep me interested? I felt my attention slipping a lot throughout the film, especially the first half. Once she met the detective, it got a little
Yeah,
more
I will say the
like,
second half is a lot more. It sort of picks up the pace. I think the issue is it's sort of like after the first man is killed and she seduced him, it's like, you know, that's her MO, but then we keep getting that. And
yeah,
it's sort of these like very similar, and that's fine, but the
yeah,
scenes themselves, like each one is like 20 minutes, I think.
yeah. And
So it
there are
adds up.
things,
And you are like, yeah, she did this with the last guy, and then it's like, okay, yep.
and there are things that are set up that don't really like come back around. Like one of the things, maybe I missed something. I don't think I'm misremembering anything, but she sells some of her products to like an apothecary like in the first 20 minutes, and then in the second half the detective goes and he was like, do you know this woman? And she was like, yes, she sold me some things. And I think like that's the extent of that plot line, and I was like,
Yeah.
is that like necessary? We could have just cut both of those scenes. It wasn't like, it didn't add something to
No,
the.
I think the it is so over the top that I don't know that you needed sort of a grounded procedural element.
No,
It's like you
yeah.
can just have the detective show up. Like he clearly would have enough evidence.
Yeah, it's not it's just there are things, it's just kind of, I would say, rambling in the first part, and that it's just kind of like moving around this world. And the world is interesting to be sure, but after a while it's just like, okay, I get the aesthetic, I get the witchcraft elements, I understand the character pretty well. Why are we just kind of floating around? Couldn't those scenes have been devoted to maybe more like intense dramatic moments, or more, exploring the character's past or something? It just, in terms of pacing and narrative action, that's where I thought the film falters. That's my main, and it is one of those films where when I was reading the interviews and trying to analyze it, I almost found the process of that more interesting than the experience of the film itself.
No, because behind the scenes too, I heard that she had a lot of issues making this film with her crew. Like they would just walk off set at times.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
that's what my girlfriend said. I haven't substantiated it, but apparently it would be something like we don't, they would just be like, we're not doing this and walk off at times.
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, that's
Which
crazy.
talk about irony for like that to happen during this
This movie.
this movie. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't substantiated it. If I find an article that actually like substantiates that, I'll link it in the show notes when this comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, I would be curious about that. But yeah, it is a film that some of the conceptual elements are more interesting than just the plot, to
I
be
mean, I
frank.
think to tie this back to an earlier episode, and I'm editing it now, so that's why
Mhm.
it's fresh in my mind. But
Oh,
Only
cool.
Lovers Left Alive, episode
Yeah.
10.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
talked about how you weren't really. You recognized that it was a good film, but it's a mood piece, and you weren't really in the mood.
Yeah.
The Love Witch is sort of my version of that,
I
like
could see that
today,
definitely.
because it's like I can recognize that it's well acted, well shot, well edited, all of this stuff. But it is ultimately a mood piece, and I wasn't really in the mood.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. It's very specific. It isn't, and I appreciate that kind of iconoclastic take on filmmaking, and it is very, as we mentioned at the start, impressive that she did. It is like definitely the product of an individual vision.
I mean, no matter what you think of it, it actually makes an impression where so many other films just sort of blend together, and you watch them and you don't remember them like a day later.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think so. Well, that's the thing. Like Anna Biller talked about how all of the reviews were focusing on just the style and how impressive the style was. And she was like, people just assume that the way mainstream movies look today, is how all movies look because of just technology, and that
Right.
you can't make it. And that's why people are so shocked when they see a movie like this, where it's like meticulously recreating the style of films of the past.
I mean, in a very bizarre way, it reminded me a little of An Evening with Beverly Loughlin, just in terms of like the sort of anachronistic
Yeah.
outfits and just sort of being outside of time, and yet like it's clearly set in the now.
Yeah, it is I could definitely see that. Certainly with just the elements of striking set design in terms of like how the how it's resistant to the contemporary expectations for how a film should look, or even like behave, like in terms of acting and whatever. And I appreciated that. And she talks also about how she viewed like all of this focus on the stylistic elements to be a kind of resistance to engage the film on its like thematic terms,
Oh,
which
I could see that. No, I could see because it is. I mean, to be fair, like the film is like stylistically like that is what you initially take from it.
well, that's the thing. Part of me is like, well, if you wanted people to focus on the thematic concerns, like, why did you make such a immediately stylistically absorbing
But
film
she, you
that's
know, she does have a point too. I'm sure
that
there were
is
most
true.
reviews weren't even going to address the whole like internalized misogyny or like what, is it a cycle of
Yeah,
abuse thing? Like
which is
what is
it's reductionist, I think, to just say it's like a curiosity, that it's like ooh, look, somebody made a retro movie that looks like a movie from the past. It's not. There's much more substance to this movie than that. It has like weighty ideas about femininity and the relationship between the sexes and all of that, and the most poignantly to me, the stories that our culture tells women that ultimately hurt women and hurt everybody. It hurts, I mean,
Yeah, it
men.
was, and they make a Stepford Wives comment at one point in the film, but it
Yeah,
is reminiscent of that,
it
where
certainly
you're
is
you're
reminiscent.
legitimately kind of stepping back, like, okay, this is what society thinks the ideal woman is. Why do we think that? And like, what
So
would happen if we had that legitimately, what some men would consider idealized woman? Like, how hollow that would be.
yeah, it's hollow, it's dehumanizing, it hurts men and women. It
Yeah, ultimately, it hurts everybody.
and it's like so unnatural. That's the thing. The aestheticism of the film, which feels so unnatural, reflects the kind of the the total artificiality of this story. And I would imagine Anna Biller certainly has a right to be frustrated that a lot of reviewers probably don't touch that just because, like, ooh, look at how pretty the film is. So, I mean, if by any chance you're listening to this, I hope we've tried to do service to your vision. But I mean, I think that, I mean, to kind of bring it to a close, I really liked the film, and I will revisit it at some point.
No, and I know I've been hypercritical of it, but I'm hypercritical of all the films we cover. I
Well,
liked it. I liked the film a lot. I mean, like, it's sort of my job to go in here and, like, kind of pick it apart because that's sort of the point of the podcast.
yeah, and it's not. I'm not saying that it's not flawed, and I do think. I mean,
I honestly don't think there's a perfect movie out there. Like, it's so
yeah,
subjective, and there's always something you can point at and go, I wasn't huge into that.
yes. I mean, I hesitate to use the B word, but I don't usually use this word. But there are parts of the film that are kind of boring in terms of narrative, and I hope, and I think she will, judging by the few plot details she's given us for her next film, that her sensibilities in terms of screenplay writing and narrative writing are just going to continue to sharpen to the point where they're on par with just the aesthetic unity of her films. But as a whole, I really enjoyed this. It is kind of my very much my wheelhouse of the type of movies that I enjoy in terms of just genre and ideas. So I think there's a lot to like here, and I would say give it a try. But yeah, do it in the right mood and be
Yeah, I
aware.
like the film too, but I guess with
Yeah.
the caveat that I'm not always in the mood.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't. It's certainly not for everybody. It is like
I mean, it's not like a movie you can just kind of throw on willy nilly, I feel like.
no. It's a niche in terms of its just like aesthetics. It's also, I don't know, it demands a level of engagement that not everybody is always willing to do. But also, even there will be people who engage with the film and just won't enjoy it anyway, which is totally fair. I see why this. I mean, there were aspects of it
I mean,
I
I
didn't like
consider
myself.
myself to be fairly open minded, but like,
Yes,
it's hard too being like a cis white man going
we.
into this film because it's sort of at times is like, look at how stupid you are. And it's like, okay, I know. Like,
That's. I mean, that's fair. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much our backgrounds actually affect how we discuss the film. As I
that's
mean,
true.
I'm also a man, and I'm not straight. I'm gay, but I don't know if how substantially that would affect my viewing of the film. But I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion. I mean, like I
Well, I guess
appreciate.
what I was trying to get at is like
Yeah.
I can kind of go yeah okay and laugh it off. There will be plenty of straight men that watch this and will just immediately tune out and be like, "What a fucking bitch! Like, why would you even
Yeah.
make that film? That's fucking stupid," you know? So
I
it's like there will
well,
be plenty of that.
or men who refuse to think about the conceptual elements of it, like, the thematic and
Right?
symbolic
They'll be so
elements,
blinded by just the whole like critique of
or just the style, just like, oh, look at how. I mean, so I mean, it's not my place to
yeah. No, I
argue,
would say divisive is a fair word though.
but divisive. But I mean, I th- any
But not, I guess
critique.
not divisive in a way that would keep people from ultimately enjoying the film. It's not like a Serbian film or something like.
Oh God, I don't think I could ever watch that movie.
I've watched it. I've watched it twice. It's honestly when you get over the shock part, there's not much to it.
That's too many movies. Maybe we'll cover it, but
I'd rather not.
I don't think so.
I'll have a really quick anecdote and then we can start finishing this up.
Yeah.
I have a friend that had a first date and he took her
Ooh.
to his apartment and we were there, my girlfriend and I, and he showed her a Serbian film
Uh,
and she was apparently like very Christian.
oh.
She started crying at the end and I was like, "Oh my God." And we left and like we're just like, is our friend a monster? Like,
That seems. I'm sorry. I can't envision a scenario in which it would be reasonable to do that to
I mean,
somebody.
even more shocking, apparently they, did it later in the night, which I was like, how is that? How does any of that? It was just a very perplexing, everything about it was like, what is going on?
Oh wow, that's strange. Talk about, I don't know, whatever. But it's how did we get here?
But yeah, let me just
The
ignore
love.
all
It's
of
not
that shit I just said. The
the
Love
love
Witch
which is not a Serbian film.
is not a Serbian film. In its divisiveness, it is like a lot easier, like it's very
to take.
It's not. The divisiveness isn't some shit where you're gonna watch The Love Witch and go, "Holy shit, I'm gonna go cry."
It's just it's a political film.
No, just like politically divisive, not like spiritually divisive.
And you don't have to you don't have to enjoy the film or agree with all of its portrayals or whatever, but you should try and take it seriously, as so many critics of it, even people who like the movie, don't seem to fully engage with what, the people write it off as just like a piece of camp, which
Right, and I
it's
think that is the
reductive.
benefit I got from watching this a second time was I had already known, okay, this is what it looks like, this is the style. And
Yeah.
then when I was going in, I was sort of looking at it from more of a story
Yeah.
side point.
And that unveils both problems with the film and also strengths for the film. I mean, I think it's the fact that we've talked about it for this period of time attests at least to the fact that it's interesting. Like it isn't a shallow film by any
No, it
means.
holds up to repeat viewings.
It's just a little dull at points
Yeah,
narratively.
that's fair.
So that's
So yeah, let's wrap this episode up. I'm going to do a real quick plug for our Patreon.
yep.
I'm woefully behind on putting stuff up on it, but I'm a very busy man. I will put stuff up on the Patreon. You want to throw $1? We got some mini episodes about short films from David Lynch and
The Midnight Gospel.
and the Midnight Gospel and the short film The Fall from John Glazer.
Yeah.
And our main hub is on Twitter at Celluloid Sits with a Z. And you can find us on Anchor, anchor.com. Well, I'll link to it. Just Google Celluloid Citizens Anchor.
Yeah. But we hope to see you there. Until then, I've been Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And hope to see you soon. That's a stupid ending.
You want to redo it?
I don't know what to say.
Yeah, I can think of something. Hold on. And don't drink things without asking what's in them.